Let's look at the Intro to Flexbox chapter from our textbook. Right now I have up on the screen the beginning of the exercise. We're going to use Flexbox to change these vertical elements, which are list items, into horizontal elements. This is the finished exercise. Notice these are the same. We have a logo and 3 other elements. We're going to turn those into horizontally aligned elements that can move back and forth using Flexbox to make this design more interesting. Also notice we have some content in the Come and Explore Tahoe area here. Then we have a footer that has an address, a copyright, and an Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter social media area. Those bottom 3 items are all in containers called divs. So let's look at the code a little bit. I'm going to close the finished one, hide our browser, and let's go to Sublime Text, our text editor, and let's open up what we were given from the publisher of our textbook to start. I'm going to open, and there should be a Flexbox intro folder. We're going to look at the index.html page. And those have the same things. This is our upper nav bar that has the logo, the hikes, contact, and sign up, as you can see here. Those are all done as unordered list items. You'll see our UL with our list items, and it has a custom class called navbar assigned to help us with some CSS. And then the Come Explore Tahoe is our text content. You can see that in the middle of our page. And these last 3 should be 3 divs in the footer. And if we'll go back and look at our content, we have the footer and we have 3 divs. 1 for the address, 1 for the copyright, and 1 for our social media links. Let's also go ahead and open up, we have an external style sheet named main.css. Let's open that file they've given us to start with as well. There you can see there's our custom class for navbar. These are some more custom classes. You'll notice that we also on our HTML page are referencing a CSS, normalized CSS file. We won't be editing that one. That one is just to even out our browser and get rid of some browser anomalies that may affect the margins and the spacing of page elements. That just kind of zeroes things out. So let's go and look at our page again. I'm actually in Chrome browser. The book says that Firefox has good dev tools. I think we have even better dev tools in the Chrome browser. So the way to get to your dev tools is you can go to View, Developer, and Developer Tools. And you'll notice up here for elements, we have our HTML. And if I click on our navbar line of code, you'll see down here in styles, you can see where we have the style for that custom class .navbar. We have border, list, type, padding, margin, and margin bottom. The reason we're going to use these dev tools, we can experiment with different Flexbox coding without actually writing our permanent code on our style sheet. So it'll give us flexibility to explore without actually blowing our design up. But let's actually go and change something on our actual style sheet. Let's add a display flex property so that we can take this vertical stacking of our list items and make it horizontal, which goes across. So let's go back to Sublime Text. Let's go to our style sheet, main.css. And our first rule, the .navbar at the very top of our CSS, let's punch in right above border. I'm going to hit a return to make a space. I'm going to say display : flex. So I'm going to say display : space and flex. Notice that our text editor automatically wrote in the semicolon at the end of this CSS rule that we've added to our custom class. So let's save that, file save, and go back and refresh in our browser. And I'm refreshing our page. And notice that turned these list item elements from a vertical stacking to a horizontal stacking because of display flex we've written. Notice if I click over here on navbar in the elements, you can now see down in our styles for CSS and .navbar, that custom class, you can see it's added that display flex down there. So we've added a flex container to the layout of this web page, starting into our Flexbox coding. Watch what happens when we change in the developer tools where our display is flex. Let's change it to Inline Flex. Now I can just click on it down here and type Inline Flex and use the actual code completion. Notice what happens when we change Inline Flex. You notice our element does not go all the way across our browser. It shortens up just to the amount of content that are in these list items, and then our Come Explore Tahoe content creeps up around to the right of it because it's not taking up the full browser width. If we want to play with the browser this way, we can actually flex the browser that way and it'll shove it back down. But if we have maximum browser window open, that's what Flex Inline does to it. So we'll change it back to Flex. Let's click on that and start typing, and it's going to find the relevant ones. I'll click on Flex. And notice our gray container box for our Flex, display Flex, goes all the way to the edge, and our content's forced down below that. That didn't actually write any or change any code over on our main CSS sheet. All that does, when you're playing with developer tools, it lets you manipulate the values of different variables on the page to see what it changes in the browser, but that will not be changing your actual code in your text editor. So when you think about the Flexbox, they originally line it out in rows. If you look at page 17 of your PDF, you'll see that natively you have two axes in your Flexbox. You have a row and a main axis. So native is row, so the native row is going to give the main axis, which is going to be horizontal like a row. Your cross axis will go up and down. You can actually change that in the coding where you can declare your flex direction to be column instead of the native row. The interesting thing about Flexbox, it's either going to flex vertically or horizontally. It's not going to flex both directions. Let's play with justifying some of our content for a little bit. Let's go back to our actual Sublime text. And on our CSS in our text editor, just below the display flex line of text in our first CSS rule, below display flex, we're going to add in justify dash content center. Put a colon in. And center. Now save that. So we'll file save. Let's go back and refresh our browser and watch what that does. Our content aligned to the center. Remember that we only did that in our CSS rule for navbar. And if we look at our index.html page, we'll notice that that rule for navbar only applies to the unordered list. It's not applying to the text, and it's not applying to the footer in our content and our footer areas. It's just going to align whatever's inside the custom class of navbar, because that's the rule we added it to. So let's go back to our browser. So now we can play with that in the developer tools without blowing up our CSS, just to see what it's going to do. So let's play with our content. Justify content. We can click in that, click on the word center, and we can play with start typing in flex and choose flex start. And it starts at the left side of our flex container. Now if we change that to flex in and justify content, didn't like that, so let's spell it out. Now notice it goes to end of our flex container, which is our unordered list. We've done the center before, but let's revisit the center. Puts it in the middle. We can put in something called space between on the justify content. Space between. And that's going to put an equal amount of space in between. Now, if you're looking at the sizes of these elements that we have the content in, notice that the actual element is only going as wide as the content in it. Notice how the logo's wider, so it's a wide element. This is only going as wide as the hikes and excursions with a little bit of padding. This one's narrower since there's only contact, and this one's as wide as sign up. So that's why those elements are the widths they are. They're just expanding as wide as the content right now. Let's look at space around as far as justify content in the Flex container. Notice it then put in space around it. At the very ends, it's one space, but then notice the space is bigger between the elements because there's the end of this one and the beginning of this one. That's why the space around. And let's look at one more called space evenly. Notice now that we have even amounts of spacing in the justify content in our Flex container. So let's go back to our CSS and add one more line of code to our rule. So we have justify content center. Now we're going to align items center. So right below that, punch in and create align dash items colon, give it a space, and put in center. Let's save that. Go back to our browser and let's refresh that. So what's happening here is the justify content center is moving them horizontally to the center. The align item center is moving the content inside each element to the center. That's why they've contracted right here. Notice how the elements have background colors, but they're only as tall as the content. So the justify item center relates to the vertical alignment.